Welcome to our Understanding Committee Roles and Responsibilities webinar. This is a shorter version of our workshop held on the 14th of March as part of Advancing Land Care project that includes a series of webinars and workshops. And I am today joining you from Warragul. I'd like to start the webinar by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we work and meet today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this webinar. In particular, the Gunakunai people, the traditional custodians of the land on which I work today. Also pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of Victoria. Today, we're going to have a few speakers, including myself. My name is Ana Pimenta. I recently moved to Victoria about a year ago. I'm a previous cattle farmer on King Island and also been part of land care for quite some time, both as a professional and also volunteer. I have experience in a number of committees, including our small land care group on King Island, regional natural resource management body in Tasmania, and also been the chair for the King Island Beef Group. And more recently, been working as a project officer for Land Care Victoria. We're lucky enough to have Juanita Pope joining us today, who is here to help us navigate through the legal requirements and contribute to some of her stories and her experience. Juanita is also the founder of Trellis Work Consulting and Advisory, and that provides legal and governance services to the not-for-profit organizations, amongst other things. Juanita also worked for almost 9 years as the head of not-for-profit law, Justice Connect. And last but not least, hi, Juanita. Last but not least, we also have Claire Hetzel. She's my colleague at Land Care Victoria. She's the Land Care Development Coordinator. And I am sure many of you will know Claire, either from the phone or some chat over the years.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Anna.
Claire. And we are also going to have some case studies, some really good case studies. It includes Gillian Staten, she's the chair of the South Gippsland Land Care Network, and Clive Carlisle, chair of the Project Platypus. They'll be sharing some of their experiences with us, and I'm sure we'll create a lot of value from them. I'd like to thank our funding partners, so that includes the Ross Trust and the Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Action. And today we will be focusing on what does it mean to be incorporated versus not incorporated, and if you are unincorporated, should you become so, as this has some important implications. We're going to talk about community roles and responsibilities, and this includes the necessity of all committee members to fully understand their responsibilities and to be aware of the institutional obligations, and to understand that a valid decision of a committee meeting binds all committee members and not just those present at the meeting at which particular matter was agreed. And that includes or only the ones that supported that decision. We're going to be looking at the legal duties of committee members. We'll take a break to introduce our case studies. And finally, we're going to talk about the particular positions within the committee, that being the chair, secretary, treasurer. Just letting you know, we won't go into too much detail. This is a short webinar. We'll be looking at broad principles of good governance rather than technical details. So it really doesn't matter the status of your organization. It will all come down to good and common sense. Just a reminder that the content and resources shared in this webinar are legal information and not legal advice. If you have a particular issue or query, get in contact with us at Land Care Victoria, and we might be able to help you. And if we can't help you, we'll definitely point you in the right direction. And also a reminder that this content is created in March 2023. So if you are looking at this webinar at a later date, just make sure to look online for any updates. So firstly, we're going to look briefly into incorporated versus not incorporated. So why are we doing this? Because it can be confusing for some land care groups, and it makes a difference to what rules or laws you must follow. So just briefly, there are many benefits of being incorporated, and in fact, Landcare Victoria does recommend that their members become incorporated. Some of these benefits will include the organisation being a separate entity to you or to the members, reduce personal liability. You can apply for grants. You can open bank accounts. There's continuity, so you can change everyone in your organisation and the organisation can continue. You can also enter into contracts, and these are just a few. And actually 50% of the Landcare Victoria member groups are actually unincorporated. But if that's your case, and if you're a Landcare member and an unincorporated group, Landcare Victoria actually expects you to behave as an incorporated group. You need to accept the Landcare Victoria's rules of association and procedures. You have the benefit of your group being covered by the Landcare Victoria's insurance. And we can also auspice some grants on your behalf.
I just wanted to point out here, Anna, that there are several different types of incorporation entities, if you like. Some people will be familiar with a company limited by guarantee, but there are also state-based entity types, most notably the Incorporated Association, which is what most incorporated land care groups have chosen to be incorporated as. And this means they've registered their group with government, with Consumer Affairs Victoria, that's the regulator, and they, as a part of that process, they have either drafted their own rules or they have adopted the model rules which are published by Consumer Affairs. So Claire, I think you've got some insight as well for groups that are a bit confused by whether or not they're incorporated or unincorporated.
Thanks, Juanita. Yeah, we actually do end up with quite a few queries from groups. Some of this is about how Landcare has been established over the years. So my advice to those groups in trying to understand whether they are incorporated in their own right, rather than sitting under Landcare Victoria as an unincorporated member group, is to just check the CAV or the Consumer Affairs Victoria website. There's a search function there that lets you put in your group name and it will pull up the status of your group if you are an incorporated group. And it will also provide a way for you to access a copy of the rules that have been established for your group, whether that be rules that you've put up specifically for your organisation or those which are the model rules from CAV. If you're unsure, truly just get in touch with Landcare Victoria. We're here to help you understand, I guess, the difference of when you are unincorporated, what the benefits of membership with us actually do provide to you as a group.
Thanks, Claire, for clarifying that. So next we're going to look at committee roles and responsibilities, whether you're incorporated or not incorporated. So this is just your common structure as a land care group. And the role of a not-for-profit board or committee, they're actually the same thing. You just give them different names. So you would be making strategic decisions. You will oversee risk management, recruiting and supporting staff, reporting to members, and ideally a good committee will have a diverse set of skills. I know it's not always possible in small organizations. The role of the committee can also depend, obviously, on the size and formality of the group. So in large organizations, it is not the role of the board to be responsible for the management and operational aspects of the organization. That means the day-to-day activities running of the organization. This is actually the role for a CEO or for any other relevant staff. But we know that some organizations are run by volunteers only, and that might be your case. So in those groups, the traditional line between governance and management is much more blurry. So everyone usually just rolls up their sleeves and gets the work done. But the important point here is the committee deals with committee business, that means governance, and then they have a particular role and responsibilities in doing this, backed up by the law. So for this reason, it is important for committee members to know what they are expected to do because they've been entrusted to look after and govern an organisation. Juanita, do you have some things to say about this?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that the wording here can be confusing for some groups. Some people call their governing body a board. Some groups call it a committee. Others, again, might call it a council. So there are different words used by different groups to describe the people who have this governing role. We'll use the word committee today because that's what's typically used by Landcare groups, but really the duties that we're going to talk about next apply to all members of that governing body. And if there are, executive level staff who have a significant influence over the affairs of the organisation and its finances, then they too can be bound by the duties that we're going to talk about today. So just a board versus committee doesn't really make much difference. And also rules versus constitution. Again, these are two alternate words for the same concept. Some groups will say rules, some groups will say a constitution.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Juanita. I also want to just we often get questions from groups around the requirement of a committee. So how many people constitutes a committee, or what positions are necessary to make up a committee or a board for a Landcare group? And the answer that we can share with you is actually you probably need to check. You need to check your rules that are governing your association. So the model rules or ones that you have been adopted for the Landcare group. And usually it's 3 or more people on a committee. Some rules will specify the actual committee positions, but many don't require you to have a chair, a vice chair, a treasurer, etc. But yeah, just check.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah, check your rules. Always important. You'll find that in a lot of our slides. So what are some other role and responsibilities of a committee? So again, understand the purpose, goals and activities of the organisation is extremely important. Understand your legal obligations, duties and liabilities, and we'll go through some of the duties soon, and monitor performance and activities against its legal purpose. Attending and participating in committee meetings and AGMs as much as possible. Being active in the organisation. Also provide input, opinion and independent judgment, in the best interest of the organisation. Declaring and monitoring actual or perceived conflict of interest. Governing and overseeing the organisation's operations and performance. And also the committee, sometimes it can be a lot. So you can delegate certain powers to staff or to subcommittees or to working groups. But the important thing here to note is that when you delegate an activity, so let's say you have a subgroup that is responsible for organizing an event. So that subgroup, it's really important that subgroup understands the scope of their powers. So how much to spend, so what are their boundaries? And also remember that ultimately the board or the committee, as we're going to refer to, is ultimately responsible for the organisation, even when you delegate. So now let's look a little bit more into the legal duties that are committee members. What is a legal duty? So it's an obligation to act in a way that meets a certain legal standard. And I'm going to help Juanita to help me with this one because it is really her bread and butter.
Thanks, Anna. Well, committee members or other governing body members are under what lawyers would call a fiduciary duty to the organisation. And a fiduciary duty is a very high standard that the law requires of people who are in positions of trust. It's actually the same concept as applies to a lawyer and their client, or a doctor and their patient. And committee members owe this level of care and duty to the organisation as a whole. So they've been entrusted to look after and steward the organisation on behalf of the membership. So hopefully it will become apparent from the next section that the duties are pretty common sense. They're pretty easy to comply with, and a lot of people will just regard them as, you know, the way things should be done. But there is legal backing to them, and it is important that all committee members are aware of them and comply with them. So I just wanted to say as a final point here that legal actions against committee members of not-for-profit organisations are very rare. Most organisations want to do the right thing, and, you know, if there is an error, it's an error because, you know, something wasn't understood properly, not because someone is intentionally doing something wrong. So these actions are rare, but it's great that everyone's listening to this webinar right now, because that's the first thing you can do to make sure that you're on the right side of these standards.
Thanks, Juanita. And I mean, how many of us, I mean, including myself, has joined a committee not knowing that we had some legal duties? Was just get into it just to do the on-ground work. We thought, nah, actually, there's quite a bit behind the scenes that we all need to know. So there are 4 main legal duties of all committee members, and these include the to act in good faith and for a proper purpose, act with reasonable care, skill, and diligence, to not misuse information or position, and to disclose and manage conflict of interest. And if you are part of a committee, you have to comply with all these duties. It is not just our office holders, not just up to the chair or the president or the treasurer or the secretary. All committee members and anyone who effectively directs and controls the organisation must comply. Some duties also continue to apply even after committee members have left the role. In particular, duties that relate to the ease of information they received during the role they held in that organisation. But before we start, I also wanted to tell you that sometimes, well, more than often, there's an overlap of duties in certain situations. So some scenarios might include more than one duties, like acting in good faith might sometimes overlap with conflict of interest. So we'll start with the first duty, to act in good faith and for proper purpose. What does this mean? So it means to act honestly, fairly, and loyally when making decisions for your organisation. You should look at membership as a whole, as well as finances and operations, and not for personal interests or preference. You need to make sure you are familiar with the aims and purposes of your organisation, again, and to ensure your committee is making decisions for the right purpose. And how do you find your organization's legal purpose? That's in the rules, again. And I'll give you a couple of examples practical examples of what it means to act in good faith and for proper purpose. So, for example, I'll use my own. I've been a board member of 2 committees. So one, a local, the Landcare Group on King Island, and the regional body that included King Island, but also other localities in that region. So what this means is that when I was at my local Landcare Group, the King Island Landcare Group, I'd be focusing on issues that were specific to my group. So if we were there to protect the King Island environment, and I was there to do that. If I moved then into dealings with the regional body, the Cradle Coast NRM, for example, that would include the whole region, the northwest region of Tasmania, which included King Island. But when I was at that meeting or dealing with emails or communications, I would be focusing on the best interests of that region, which sometimes could include King Island, but I removed that focus and focused just on the region. Acting with proper purpose. This is also really important to not confuse purpose with the nature of the activity. For example, so let's say your organization's purpose is to protect the red-tailed black cockatoo. Probably not okay to apply for a grant that will build a fence around the footy oval. But if that fence protects the red-tailed black cockatoo, why not? So it is the nature of the activity, and if it aligns with your purposes.
Yeah, and the main thing there is the alignment with the purpose. You have to be able to justify everything that you're doing in furtherance of your organisation's purpose.
Thank you. Anita, do you want to talk a bit through some other things that I need to remember?
Great, thank you. If this purpose and these rules are so important, we need to know what they are. So it's a good idea to have a copy of the rules at your meetings or handy when you're considering committee decision making. You need to check your decision making process. You need, as Anna's example describes beautifully, whose interests must I have at the centre of my decision-making process? It can't be your own personal interests. It can't be the interests of a particular stakeholder group associated with the organisation that you're governing. It must be the organisation's best interests as a whole, even if you've been, appointed to the committee because of a particular, attribute or geographical area that you can represent. You must have in mind the whole organisation when you're making those decisions. And a part of doing that is also to test how will it look later. Consider those decisions and how they might look from the outside. It's a bit of a gut feeling sometimes with this one, but what we're trying to do here is to justify that an honest and reasonable person in the shoes of that committee making that decision at that time, it was a reasonable decision to make, and it looks so from the outside.
Yeah, and actually, Juanita, I share some of my personal experience, which has nothing to do with Landcare, but to do with my son, that when he was 4, he had some adenoids and tonsils issues, and the doctor, the pediatrician at the time said, the best thing is to remove them. It'll make his life a lot better. And I said, well, I'm not too comfortable with this. What if in a few years' time we find out that they're actually essential, and they're really beneficial to keep them for his health? And he just responded to me at that time, look, Anna, I can only make a decision based on the best information available to me today. And the available information today is that it's the best thing would be to remove them. So I can't make a decision on things that might happen, but this is all the facts that I've got today, and this is the best decision today. And so I think that really lines up with it.
Yeah, and the law also will recognise that, it's easy with the benefit of hindsight to think that something wasn't the best decision and could have been better, perhaps, could have panned out differently. But, the law recognises that, and it's not required to make perfect decisions, just reasonable ones.
The next we're going to talk about the acting with reasonable care, skill and diligence, and what does that mean? Diligence means you need to take your role seriously. So being a volunteer is also a responsibility. So that means being prepared for meetings and to be informed about all activities and what decisions are to be made. So that's a really good idea to always read the minutes before you attend a meeting. Consider this when making a decision for your organization. Some of you might have heard about the business judgment rule. So that includes, for example, 1, decisions made in good faith and for proper purpose. Secondly, are there any potential conflict of interest by you or anyone from this committee in the outcome of this decision? Third, did you inform yourself about the subject matter? And fourth, do you rationally believe that the judgment is in the best interest of your organization? So this is business judgment rule. Secondly, the skill. So you need to make appropriate use of your skills and experience on behalf of the organization. So let's say you join Landcare group and you're an accountant. Probably a good idea to put your hand up for treasurer or support the treasurer in his role. You need to take care. So that means sufficient time and thought and energy. It does take, we all know it takes a lot of that. And last, monitor the affairs and activities, the strategy and financial position of the organization. understand the current financial position at all times. That is very important in order to ensure that the financial affairs of the organization are managed responsibly, and prevent your organization from continuing to incur debts if you suspect that your organization cannot meet its debts when they fall due, so insolvency. Because it is all committee members are actually accountable for an organization's solvency, and not just the treasurer. So just make sure you are informed at all times with what happens with the finances of your organization.
Thanks, Anna. So a few tips around this particular duty, and as Anna has emphasised, it's important to be prepared and attend meetings, speak up and ask. You know, there are no silly questions, and sometimes your silly question might be someone else's silly question. Between you all, you get at a great outcome through a bunch of not silly questions. Do what you say you will do. So if you've got an action item coming out of a meeting, follow that up. Make informed and thoughtful decisions, and that means seeking further advice if you feel like you don't have enough information before you to make a reasonable and thoughtful decision. Know your organisation's planned activities. You can't exercise your duties effectively without knowing the organisation and what it does and its risks. Take care when committing to particularly large contracts or new projects that you haven't done before, and make sure that, as we've said, the organisation is able to pay its debts when they fall due. And if you have any concerns about solvency, put the brakes on the spending immediately and seek financial help.
Thanks, Juanita. Third duty, the act to not dishonestly use information or position. So committee members cannot make improper use of information gained by being in the committee or as a position as a committee member, to either gain advantage for themselves or any other person or organisation, or to hurt the organisation. And this applies to both current and former committee members.
So some tips on this one, Anna. This is really one of those ones that has close connections with other duties. We've talked about loyalty in the first duty, but here again, it's about not being dishonest when you're using that information and thinking about your position. There's also links here with confidentiality and privacy, in the sense that sometimes the information you'll be provided with is confidential or of a personal nature. So some organisations will have their committee members sign a code of conduct or a confidentiality agreement to really entrench that obligation. Induction's really important here as well, so that new committee members know what's expected of them and how to act. And really, just on this final point around confidentiality again, it's best to communicate decisions made by the committee, but not to go through the ins and outs of discussions at committee meetings. That's generally regarded as a confidential conversations. So check in with your committee about what a level of disclosure publicly or to other Landcare members or groups you can, disclose around committee discussions and deliberations. General rule of thumb, decisions, not discussions. Now, we had a couple of participant questions around these matters, which I'd just like to address now. In terms of the induction materials, it will depend, that could be provided to new committee members. It will really depend on your organisation, but as a general starting point, the rules, some practical guides on their duties, the key policies of the organisation, the latest financial information. There might be some opportunities for training or skill development that you've identified that is also good to pass on to those new committee members. And we had another participant question about whether or not this duty not to act dishonestly when using information applies to all members of the organisation or just the committee members. And this particular duty, it being fiduciary in nature, does apply to the committee members, but there are other ways that you might make sure that all members of your association are using information appropriately and complying with privacy obligations as well. So some organisations will have a privacy policy, a collection statement, tick boxes on forms and things to make sure that people are using information in ways that are appropriate to the group. The Privacy Act will also kick in here for larger groups.
Thanks, Juanita, for the clarification. And thanks for the great questions. So next, last but not least, we'll talk about disclosing and managing conflicts of interest. Conflicts of interest are actually very, very common, and I reckon it happens to every group. And what does this mean? It's when someone can gain a personal benefit from a certain actual or future opportunity. And they are common and they're okay. It just depends how you deal with it. And this is what it is recommended. Sorry, we'll go into the recommendations after this. First, I want to give you a case study, an example of how this can happen. So this actually happened to me. I previously had a business, cattle farming business, and I was part of the Landcare group. So let's say if you are a committee member, or we'll call it Bushy Creek Landcare group, but you also own a farming business. The interest of that group will be to protect and enhance the Bushy Creek's koalas. The interest of your business will be what's best for your business, making, being profitable, etc. So there's a decision to be made in your group, and that's to allocate grants to farmers to protect native vegetation. But then you have a goal in your own business that is to fence off native shelter belts in your property. So the best interests of your Landcare group will be to increase koala population, improve the hectares of native vegetation, increase the number of farmers engaged. The best interest of your business will be to increase kilos per hectare, profitability, and increase the amount of shelter available for stock. So there you have your potential conflict of interest. So if that happens to you, what do you do? So your first thing will be to disclose. When do you disclose? As soon as you are aware. Again, minutes are very handy for this. So if you know this is coming up, you can be prepared to disclose. Also, some types of entities are expected to or required to maintain a register of interest, and that's actually also recommended even if you're not. Then you manage. How do you manage? The best practice will be to not participate in decision making or voting. That means leaving the room while the matter is being discussed and decided on. And after you do that, it's very important to record. So make it clear that the conflicted person wasn't involved in making the decision. That means record their disclosure, record the time they left, and the time they returned to the room in the minute. Juanita, do you have something? I believe you have something to say about this.
Yeah, so we're just going to kind of address a participant question that came up on this, which is, can we pay a person who is on the committee to do a different role, not for their committee role per se, but in another capacity, perhaps they're a project manager or something like that. So the first step here is to check your group's rules, because some groups won't allow a committee member to also be paid by the organisation, and that's generally in there to protect against the risk of conflict of interest. If it is allowed under your group's rules, then you'll need to have a conflict of interest process for any matters in which that person is conflicted. So what we've said above, that person would not be participating in the decision and voting on, for example, how much pay they would get in that other role. And there may be other matters where it's appropriate for that person to step out of the room because the decisions being made by the committee touch upon their paid interest in the organisation. Yeah. So sometimes, though, it can be it can get to the point where a conflict of interest is so severe or regular or repeated, recurring, that it becomes untenable for that person to continue to be on the committee because they're just always dealing with conflicts of interest. It may end up being out of the room for most of the meeting. That can often happen, for example, if you've got a CEO who is also on the committee. That's an example where it can get tricky. So in those situations, it is possibly an option for that person to just resign from the committee if they can't manage that conflict of interest on an ongoing basis. Another example is where, two organisations are competing for funding regularly, and it's integral to both of their sustainability that they get a particular pocket of money. Then the relationship between those two organisations may become too close or too competitive to be able to sustainably maintain both positions. So there are circumstances where resigning is the best option. Sorry, just to continue on then. We want to create a culture where disclosing potential conflicts of interest is encouraged. We want to read the agenda for potential conflicts. If in doubt, you should disclose a potential conflict so that the committee can discuss what to do. Check your rules and policies. Are there particular provisions in your rules which cover how conflicts of interest need to be managed? We've already mentioned a register of interest, which is a good thing for any group. And this is not just a legal issue. Often it's an organisation's reputation that's on the line. So consider that even if you might be able to do something legally, what's it going to look like from the outside? And you certainly don't want to be in a position where you're seen to be influencing a situation for your own benefit.
Thanks, Juanita. And you might be thinking, oh, so what are the consequences of breaching some of these duties? Again, it is rare.
It is rare, and members of incorporated associations are typically not personally liable for the costs incurred by the organisation itself, and that's the concept of limited liability. But, and here's the but, the law does recognise that if a committee member has failed to act in accordance with the duties that we've just discussed, there can be times when they can be personally liable. Again, this is very rare, but there are legal consequences that would flow from that situation. And so it is possible for there to be personal liability in cases of breach of duty. Perhaps what's useful at this point is to detail what you can't say or what's not a reasonable excuse. For example, Anna.
Oh, look, you can't say, oh, look, I'm new to the committee, so I didn't have the same experience as the other members. That's a no.
Yeah, and you definitely can't say, I didn't appreciate what being on the committee would require of me. That's not going to work.
That's not going to work. Neither is I didn't agree, but I just stood by and didn't say anything.
Or, oh, look, I'm just a volunteer. I'm just a volunteer. I don't have any responsibility. I didn't have time to look into the issue.
Or even to say, I just did what the others told me to do. That's just not going to fly.
So some of the, if in the extreme rare case where you can't breach a legal duty, you might be fined or face compensation, disqualifications. Extreme cases, some criminal penalties, damage to reputation, got to consider that. And overall, the reduced trust and confidence in the Landcare as a whole movement.
If something does go wrong and you do find that you need to defend against an allegation of a breach, there are some ways that you can protect yourself. Of course, the best one is to comply with the duties so you never have to rely on these. But if you do need to defend, then you need good evidence. that you complied with your duties. And we've talked about some of those types of evidence in the presentation so far: minutes of meetings showing how a conflict of interest was managed, notes, meeting papers, etc. Also, for Victorian incorporated associations, there is a requirement to indemnify, and that means essentially pay back committee members who incur costs because of something that they have done in the course of carrying out their duties in good faith. So there might be opportunity there for a committee member who perhaps has to pay a lawyer to get some advice to defend against a claim. The organisation could pay them back because they've incurred that cost because of the duties that they were entrusted with, and they were doing so in good faith. Landcare groups are also indemnified through Landcare Victoria's processes and insurance options. And I think Claire's going to talk a little bit more about insurance now.
Thanks, Juanita. So yeah, one of the main benefits of being a member of Landcare Victoria, which is seen by our member groups, is the insurance cover that Landcare Victoria holds. This is an umbrella policy, so it does include the directors and officers cover, so the cover of being on a committee. But it's really important to note that the directors and officers policy will not cover committee members if they're dishonest or undertaking fraudulent actions. If they knowingly are engaged in insolvent trading or a willful breach of duty, or a contravention of the duty not to misuse the position or information. So it is important to understand these roles and responsibilities and to follow through in terms of best practice as a committee member.
Thank you, Claire. And as just a reminder that there are other duties and personal liability apart from the four main duties we just talked about. That includes working with children, employment laws, and others, just so you are aware. This is the end of our four first themes. We're now going to head to our guest speakers. We're so lucky to have some amazing, knowledgeable and hands-on people here today. That is the case of Gillian Staton. Gillian runs a 300-acre beef farm with her husband at Cape Liptrap in South Gippsland. She worked as a lawyer and moved into communications later. Specialty areas are agriculture and environmental sustainability. Gillian is passionate about the environment and decided to get involved in Landcare at a strategic level when they moved to the farm permanently in 2019. She currently chairs the South Gippsland Landcare Network and also is the president of the Darwin Landcare Group. Clive Carlisle will be following Gillian, and Clive and his wife own a 145-hectare property that is adjacent to the Grampians National Park, and they manage that for biodiversity values. They joined their local Landcare group in 2015. Clive became the group's Project Platypus board representative in 2016 and the chair in 2019. Well, Clive's professional career is quite impressive. He's worked with the CSIRO. He managed over 350 staff. He's also been part of three boards with very, very large turnover, so in the millions of dollars. Lots and lots of great experience before coming into this group.
Thank you for the introduction, Anna. I was really flattered to be asked to do this. Anna said that apparently we had a very functional board, and I'm not actually convinced that either of my boards or my committees are any more functional than anybody else's, but I'm more than happy to share my experiences in being chair of a not-for-profit organisation. And if it helps anybody else take the step to put their own hand up, then I'll be really, really pleased. as Anna said, I'm chair of both the South Gippsland Landcare Network and also president of the Tarwin Landcare Group. And as I think it was Juanita said before, my two organisations have different rules of association. So I do use the words chair and president and committee and board and rules and constitution interchangeably. So I hope that won't confuse anybody. From the outset, I'd say if you were in the position of setting up a new organisation, I would really recommend simply adopting the model rules of association. I think they've got just about everything in them that you need, and it's very clear and straightforward. And also, if you were working out a number of people for your committee, and someone's asked earlier how many people should be on a committee, too big that you can't get a quorum, and it's not too small that you don't get a good diversity of opinion within your group. So I guess I think this has been really about governance. I'm probably going to talk about a mixture of governance and the way that I try to run an effective and an efficient meeting. So I hope that will be okay, Anna, that it kind of is more a kind of a practical look of how I run a meeting. What I think is really important, as you've already touched on, is that you know your rules of association. So when I came on to be chair and president of those two organisations, it was roughly the same time, and I had zero experience. I'd never chaired a meeting, and I found it actually really quite terrifying. But I thought, okay, well, the important thing is look at the rules of association, and that gives me all of the procedural rules that I have to follow, like, you know, what's my quorum? How much notice do we have to give? What do I need to, you know, how many people need to vote yes for a resolution? That type of thing. So I would say that for the first probably 18 months, every time I had a meeting, I had those rules of association next to me, just in case I needed to look at something, because it's when you're kind of caught on the hop, or when there's a bit of pressure and you need to know something, you want to be able to access it really quickly. Like you might have a situation, for example, where you've only got 4 people turn up to your meeting and you need a quorum of 5. Well, can you ring somebody? Do your rules allow for someone to attend a meeting on the phone or online? So even if you don't know the answer, if you can, you know where to go and find the answer, that will give you a lot of confidence, and it will actually kind of speed everything up as well. I also have a copy of this thing called Josky's Law and Procedure, which luckily I haven't really needed to use, but at least I've got it just in case I do. And I have to add that everybody on my committee is absolutely fantastic, and I don't think anyone would challenge me, but I just get myself sometimes a little bit apprehensive before a meeting because I want to do it, you know, absolutely right. So another thing when I'm running the meeting is that I think, you know, once I've kind of crossed off, I know that we've got the quorum, and I know what my notice requirements are and everything. You've actually got a remarkable discretion as chair to run the meeting the way that you see fit. So for me, a quick meeting or a short meeting is a really good meeting. So, and I really want to be respectful of people's time as well. I really value the fact that they're on my committee. So as chair, it's my responsibility to make things run as quickly and smoothly as possible. At the same time, though, I'm really aware that when you put your hand up for a community organisation, you're there for community and social reasons. So I think your meetings do have to be something that people enjoy and that they don't resent coming along to. So we have our Landcare group meetings at a committee member's house, and we have coffee and biscuits, and that's all lovely. And for the board, we nominate someone at each meeting to do the catering for the next meeting. And we have, you know, wine and cheese and stuff like that. And I allow time before the meeting and after the meeting for people to, you know, catch up and have a bit of a chat. But I'm really quite rigorous about what time I start the meeting. So if the meeting says 7 o'clock, provided we've got a quorum, we start that meeting. And I try to move along, you know, really quite quickly. I don't worry about apologies. There's nothing in my rules to say I need to announce the apologies. And if someone's not there, they're not there. You know, that doesn't really worry me. Conflicts of interest. That's a really interesting one. The first thing I do after doing the acknowledgement of country is that I remind everybody on the board about their duty to disclose any material conflict of interest as soon as they become aware of it. I think that people think that conflict of interest is a kind of a dirty word, and it's shameful to have a conflict of interest. But as you said before, Anna, if you're in a community organisation where you're trying to do things to benefit the community and you're part of that community, then of course, conflicts of interest are going to come up. So the really important thing is that you disclose that conflict of interest. And so we will discuss the potential conflict as a committee. And often it turns out that we don't actually feel that it's a conflict of interest. It might simply be that you're part of a group that is going to get a benefit from something that we're doing. And that doesn't put you in conflict, in our opinion. But then there could be other situations when a conflict does arise, that we feel that it is a material conflict of interest. It's really important that we note it in the minutes so that we say that, you know, Fred had a conflict of interest and the action that we took. And invariably that will be that Fred is, you know, stepped out while the matter was being decided and didn't take any part in the decision-making process. But the really important thing is that it's minuted and it's there for everybody else to see. And I don't think, and I also point out to everybody that they need to disclose the conflict of interest as soon as they become aware of it. So you may not know just from looking at the agenda that there's a conflict, but when it comes time to discussing the issue that you're going to decide on, that you might find that that's when you realise, or it might even be after the meeting. It's just as long as you disclose it and we can then deal with it, that's the really important thing. But just sitting on it leads you in, you know, really does open you up and your committee to a really, you know, it could have serious consequences for everybody. And also, it just doesn't look good. So, yeah, just be upfront with your conflicts of interest. Once we've gone past the conflict of interest and we get into the actual, you know, discussing the business and stuff like that, something that really gives me the irrits is this convention, I guess, of moving and seconding motions or decisions. And there's nothing in my rules of association that say I need to have a mover or a seconder. And I've been at so many meetings where people have had this, have insisted on someone moving and seconding the motion when they don't actually even know what the purpose of those words are. So I've dispensed with it. I think it's really intimidating for new people who come onto a board who think, I can't chair a meeting because how do I, you know, what do I do with that moving and seconding and thirding and all of that business? So for me, we don't do that. I simply read out what in as simple terms as I can, the issue that we're making a decision on. Everybody makes the decision. We record whether it's a unanimous decision or whether maybe someone's dissented. And then I ask the secretary to repeat the decision that we've made, just to make sure that everybody, you know, is on the same page. And then I also ask the secretary to put down the actions that flow from the decision, the name of the person on the committee who's responsible for following up on that action. And then I ask the secretary to distribute the minutes as soon as possible after we've, you know, after the meeting, ideally 24 hours if he can. And while I can't, you know, make everybody read the minutes when they come round, I encourage everybody to read them, and I certainly read them so that I know that the secretary has, well, what he's written down accords with what I remember the meeting to be while it's still fresh in my mind. And it's also amazing how accountable people can be when they see their name in black and white in those minutes. It's a good record, and it's a good prompt for them to do whatever they were supposed to do. And I guess that leads me on to, it can actually be really quite hard to get people to do things, and that's a role of being the chair that I do find quite hard, because sometimes you feel like you might be a nag or something. But what I've worked out is that it's human nature to do things that we want to do or that we're good at doing. So I think it's really important as chair to take the time to get to know your board members and understand, you know, what are their strengths and what are their weaknesses? What are the things that drive them or motivate them? What do they like doing? And we have got provision in our rules of association to create subcommittees. And with the exception of the subcommittee for our fund that has tax deductible status, and there's also a finance committee, where we've actually got a lot of freedom with the subcommittees to make new committees or close subcommittees down. They have their own terms of reference. And so I've found that if you can set up subcommittees that really cater for people's strengths and weaknesses, strengths and passions and everything, you can actually, you can work with them, and they can have much more impact in your organisation than if you say, oh, look, do you think you need to do such and such, without any kind of consideration of whether they might enjoy that or not.
Gillian.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, we might have to finish off.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I've gone on way too much. I apologise.
That's okay. I'm here to remind you. It's hard to keep track of time.
That's all right. I was going to, that was the last thing anyway, just talking about the subcommittees. And we've also got provision to invite people who aren't on the board to be part of the subcommittee. So that broadens our capacity, the capacity of our board as well.
Well, thanks, Anna, for the introduction, and hello, everyone. Hopefully you're going to find the next 10 minutes or so useful. I thought perhaps first up, I'd just give you a very brief rundown about our Landcare network, just to put some of the stuff I'm going to say in context. So we've got about 8 salaried employees who sort of work between 1 and 3 days a week. We've got our own premises and vehicles and equipment. The board's comprised of up to 10 members, and they're proposed from our member Landcare groups at an annual general meeting. We're fairly conventional, traditional, and you have a chair, deputy chair, treasurer, and secretary. Currently, we've got one very active subcommittee, which we call a donor engagement group, and that's very much around seeing if we can, I guess, improve some of our funding independence, largely through attracting philanthropic funding. Board meets monthly. The majority of members generally make an effort to actually physically try and attend, but we also do have Zoom if necessary, which is useful sometimes, particularly in winter, because some members have the best part of an hour to drive, and in country areas after dark, kangaroos, it's not ideal. I joined our local Landcare group in 2015, ended up on the Project Platypus board in 2016, mainly because I actually asked at our Landcare AGM what was Project Platypus, which was clearly a mistake. And I've been chair of the Project Platypus board since 2019. We're lucky in that a number of members of the board are extremely experienced in terms of governance and the way in which boards operate. So I generally don't have to worry too much about dotting I's and crossing T's, because if I don't, someone will suggest that maybe I should, which is nice to have. We have an induction pack, which we give to members, and that covers things like our strategic plan, history, obviously board member contact details, website, and also links to a series of governance courses. And on top of that, we're considering putting together a sort of draft guidelines for people who are considering nominating, just to really give them a feel for what is involved. Now, in terms of my experience in being chair specifically, first I'd say, I think generally we actually have a pretty functional board, which is nice. It makes life easier, but it's not always the bed of roses. And we certainly had some tense moments. And things such as we entered a MOU with a local exploration and mining company, and that was associated with a reasonable amount of external funding. But of course, there was a divergence of opinion and sentiment across the board around that, which was reasonably difficult to manage, but we worked it through. And another slightly contentious issue was in formulating our current strategic plan. Some members were quite keen on the idea of having an external facilitator, and others basically didn't see the need. That's partly because some of the board members were actually extremely experienced in putting together strategic plans and felt they were probably more experienced than any facilitator we were likely to be able to attract. Some of that did lead to personality clashes between a couple of members, which I guess I couldn't fully resolve. And in the end, we lost one of those members reasonably amicably, but it was unfortunately, a reasonably significant loss. So in terms of when I started as chair, I guess my previous work experience and the way in which I tended to operate didn't actually help, in that I was very used to widely canvassing ideas and opinions from a large number of staff. But in the event of disagreement, it was me that made the final decision. And even if that was a minority decision, if you like, basically I felt I was paid to make that decision and I would make it. And of course, that doesn't work very well with a board where you're actually trying to get consensus of opinion. So sometimes I think that background was actually slightly unhelpful. So I probably tended to be a bit too impatient and directive. In some situations, I think I maybe think too quickly on my feet for some people to actually fully engage and come along. I like to get to the point as quickly as possible. And I've obviously now learned that different people operate on different decision-making timeframes. And if you want to try and get everyone fully engaged, you really do need to make allowances for that. The fact that some people take longer to make up their opinion and get to a point doesn't make that opinion or point any less valuable. In some cases, in fact, it's the opposite. The other issue I guess I had, working for CSIRO, I was used to some extremely robust discussion, so that sort of conflict and disagreement to some extent was water off a duck's back for me, but I quickly discovered it could be quite confronting for some of the other board members. So I've made a real effort to tone that down. But currently, I guess I see my main role is around trying to ensure active participation and input from everyone on the board. So I learned fairly early on that quite a lot of decisions tended to be unanimous, and one or two people would talk to them, and then there'd be a show of hands, and that was it. But after a while, it was sort of obvious that it tended to be the same people that commented and gave their opinion, and other people sat there relatively quietly, and while they voted in favour, we never actually heard what their point of view was. So I now try to go around, every time there's something that's going to come to a vote, I actually go around the table, individually get people to give their opinion and their position. And that's time consuming on occasions, but I think it's pretty positive, just to ensure that we get input from everyone on the board. These are sort of statements of the obvious, but basically when we do have issues, I think the thing is to, if at all possible, physically meet with the person or persons where there's an issue. If you can't do that, phone rather than email. It just seems to work much, much better. And don't put things off. Sometimes it can be a bit, it's not always nice to have to sort of address or try to work through conflicts. So there's a tendency to put that off. It's better if you can actually just nip things in the bud and act early.
Thanks, Clive.
Yeah.
Do you reckon, Clive, have we got through most of your content? Is anything else you wanted to say? We're just running a little bit at a time.
Okay, no. Yeah, okay, no, I'm just about done. So the one thing I did implement, which I think has been reasonably useful, is annually we have a simple board and chair feedback form for board members to sort of fill in. And some people, when I send that out, will actually phone up and actually tell me how they feel, but it's quite good for those that wouldn't feel comfortable doing that.
Thank you so much, Julian and Clive. That was amazing, and I'm sure everyone got some really good ideas. I'm really thankful for your time today and for volunteering tonight again. So now we're going to look into the committee positions. So again, you need to check your rules of what positions your group has, so they can have different names. So chairperson might be the president, the chairman. So you have to check your rules for that. We're going to run through the secretary and also the treasurer.
And just a note here, Anna, that these roles can help the committee run smoothly. But as we've discussed earlier, it is actually the whole committee that's responsible for the decisions of the committee. And it's important, therefore, that you've got the right skills on your committee. Some organisations will have an annual committee feedback process or a skills matrix exercise to help them identify and evaluate the skills that they have on the committee and to inform future committee recruitment.
Thank you, Juanita. So a chairperson is probably the most important officer, if not of any, in a not-for-profit organisation. So being a chair in a not-for-profit, if you are a chair and you're here tonight, you know that it is both rewarding and demanding. You need to communicate both internally and externally the culture and the philosophy of that organization. You need to ensure the committee works towards its strategic outcomes and purpose, provide leadership, direction, and coordination. And you represent the culture of that organization. If you are here tonight and you are considering a chair position, these are some things you might consider. And keep in mind that you don't have to tick all these boxes, but these are some really good starters. So first of all, understand the purposes and objectives and culture and they do line up with my values. The weakness and strengths of that organization. Do I have the time and energy? Do I have the experience? And if I don't have the experience, is there someone there that can help me through? Do I have the financial literacy? Why do I need to have financial literacy? Because you need to work with the treasurer. You need, actually, all committee members should have a level of financial literacy. And what can I bring to the table? Are there any particular set of skills? And these are some of the main tasks that a chairperson might do. I'm not going to go into detail because this can vary from organization to organization. And these slides are actually available. If you need them, please get in touch with us. But ultimately, the specific responsibilities assigned to a chair will vary from organization to organization. So it is important that you read your rules and committee charter if you have one, to find a clearly defined statement of your responsibility. Usually the rules won't say much about the role of the chair day to day. It is a good idea to develop committee charter. It's like a policy which sets out expectations of the committee positions, including the chairperson. Claire, do you have something to say? We heard about committee inductions. Can you share something about committee inductions?
Yeah, I think it's just really important to note that when someone steps into the organisation, they're not going to immediately know everything. So having an induction package ready to go and supporting them with introductions to the staff and to the other board members, providing a tour of the premises if you have an office or a space that the Landcare Group or network is really active in, are really important things to remember to do. And we can sometimes forget that in the day-to-day of having a long history of working with the Landcare committee. It's really important to provide a committee with the policies and procedures of the organisation. So it's to set a good example, and they need to, if you're not going to provide them with those resources, then you need to delegate that to someone in the organisation to do so. It's also important that those policies and rules are reviewed. It's also really important that the chair understands that they're helping to manage the dominance and bullying issues that can arise in group dynamics. So the chair should ensure that the board members wait their turn to speak and distribute speaking opportunities equally, and that bullying at board meetings is just not tolerated under any circumstances. So it's helping to keep things running smoothly. I think that's just really important to remember. Thanks,
like
Emma.
a culture keeper, isn't it? A chair.
Yep. Thank you, Claire.
The secretary of the committee is an important role as well, one that has external responsibilities as well as internal responsibilities. So under the association's legislation in Victoria, the secretary has certain roles and responsibilities, and that's usually the same person as the secretary on the committee. That person, for example, needs to ensure that the annual statement is submitted. Now, that annual statement is just a simple report on your organisation's activities and finances. Whether it goes to Consumer Affairs Victoria or to the ACNC will depend on whether your organisation is registered as a charity or not. If a charity, it goes to the ACNC. If not, Consumer Affairs. There are also obligations for notification to various regulators in certain circumstances. For example, if the organisation changes its name or sometimes if it changes its rules. And it's usually the secretary that has those responsibilities. As well, there are lots of internal record keeping and document retention responsibilities typically held by the secretary, and Anna's going to talk about them now.
Thanks, Juanita. Yes, so I think everyone thinks that secretaries have to do so much, and they do. But yeah, these are some of the tasks. Again, I'm not going to go into too much detail. We can provide these slides later. But you know, receive applications for memberships, keep and maintain members register, set up dates for the meetings, take minutes, and again, you can actually delegate some of these tasks. Record keeping, strategy, again, assist with developments and aims and strategic plans, and representation of the organization, mainly through, through whatever, but you know, secretary is usually the signature for the contract, and also sign the statements and forms to submit to the regulators.
Now, for most of these activities, as you've said, Anna, it's perfectly fine for the secretary to delegate some of those matters to other people on the committee or to volunteers or staff, but there are actually some circumstances, particularly with regard to signatures and submission of external regulator documentation, where the secretary needs to sign personally or to oversee that process in some way. So there are some great resources for secretaries out there on the Consumer Affairs Victoria website, as well as some other sources of information that we'll refer to at the end of this presentation that can help people understand their role as a secretary.
Thanks, Juanita. And I know some people get stuck into not accepting a role of a secretary because they have to take the minutes. No, you don't have to take the minutes. You can delegate that task as long as you then check them through. So that's fine. And lastly, we're going to talk about the treasurer. I'm also a treasurer, not a good one, but I try to do my best. But the position of treasurer is the key of keeping the organization's finances in order. It requires a time and dedication. And some of the tasks of a treasurer will include financial administration, reviewing procedures, advise the committee on financial strategy, and provide reports to the committee about the financial status, advise on fundraising. It's just important to remember that most small not-for-profit organizations do not employ staff. So if that's your case, if in these committees, the treasurer is the person who actually takes the lead on the actual work. So pays the checks, deposits, pays the bills, deposits the check, manages the bank accounts, does the budget, keeps the committee informed, everything. In large organizations or medium to large, you might have an admin and bookkeeper where you delegate some of these tasks, but it is important that the treasurer oversees the way the finances are managed and plays a check and balance role. So if you have been appointed as a treasurer, it's a good idea to learn about your organization's financial state or of affairs, meet with the previous treasurer, check where the financials are kept, financial files, ensure the bank authorizations and signatures are up to date. So check who's the signature, remove signatures that shouldn't be there, and really good idea for you to be a signature. It's also a good idea to have 2 signatures for paying accounts.
Sometimes that's required in an organisation's rules too, Anna.
Exactly.
So check your rules on the financial controls required. Yeah,
definitely. Thanks, Juanita. And plan for the organisation's good financial health. So have financial procedures manual in case to provide to your staff or to incoming treasurer, and prepare a prepared timeline of payments and key dates for payment. And just a reminder that we are actually having a webinar around financial governance coming up on the 2nd and the 16th of May. Some takeaway messages. We are on at the end of the webinar now. Some takeaway messages is that committees make decisions as a whole, and for all, not individually. And it is a responsibility of the whole committee and not the individual. And you can go back to Clive's presentation about this. And with particular roles such as chair, secretary, treasurer, that is not really higher duty. They don't have higher duties. They just have more tasks. And again, transparency is the key. Just keep records, inform your other committee members of what's happening, and everything will be okay. It's all about common sense. There's also some useful links and information that might be handy. We can provide this to you again as a PDF. And finally, I just wanted to take a moment to appreciate how awesome and unique you all are. I haven't said this, but I'm actually Portuguese. I grew up in a different country, and it amazes me coming to Australia and seeing the amount of work that people do as volunteers, not just in Landcare, but I know the Landcare movement. I know the Landcare volunteers, and I think that the amount of knowledge and skill of our volunteers is quite amazing, and you can actually see that through Gillian and Clive. And so if we're going to put a money value on that, you know, it's just phenomenal. And usually Landcares are also a great bunch of people, I find. So, you know, just give yourselves a pat on the back for the great work you do, and don't get too frustrated with these, you know, all these laws and legal duties. I know most of you are trying to do the right thing, and just by coming here tonight is the proof that you are in the right track.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for coming. And thanks for Juanita for being here to supporting us, and to Claire for your support, Claire.
Thank you, Anna. And I truly just want to say to everyone who has come tonight, thanks for taking this time, and do just get in touch. So we are here. We are the peak body of Landcare groups and networks across the state. Our contact details are up there, and we are always happy to have a chat. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.